afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Brief for Tuesday, December 2nd, 2025. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Jenkins, president of the Washington Times Foundation, which sponsors this webcast. Dr. Jenkins is also president of the Washington Times Holdings, the LLC that owns the Times News organization. He has led many successful fact-finding trips to Korea for policy experts and peace initiatives to the Middle East for the Universal Peace Federation. Dr. Jenkins, good to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Larry. We're so happy to be back. Our topic today is escalating tensions between China and Japan. The Washington Times just had a headline yesterday on Thanksgiving, Taiwan to build up defenses against China on the front page. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi remarked that a Chinese attack on Taiwan threatening Japan's survival could trigger a military response. A Chinese diplomat in Osaka fired off a text, now deleted, about cutting off her neck. Now, pushback is escalating on both sides, including trade, tourism, and entertainment. We're very happy to present at this program today Dr. Yoon Sun. We're hosted today by Ambassador Joseph DeTrani, our moderator, and also our lead commentator. As he was special envoy for the six-party talks with North Korea and former director of National Counterproliferation Center. He's a senior advisor at Sandia National Laboratories and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Our other prestigious commentator is Dr. Alexandre Mansourov. Dr. Mansourov is an adjunct professor for security studies at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown in Washington. He's also an adjunct professor of Korean studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins. And Dr. Yoon Sun is our keynote speaker and guest panelist today. She's a senior fellow and director of the China program at the Stimson Center. Her expertise is in Chinese foreign policy, U.S.-China relations, and China's relations with neighboring countries in authoritarian regimes. From 2011 to 2014, she was a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution, jointly appointed by the Foreign Policy Program and the Global Development Program, where she focused on Chinese national security, decision-making processes, and China-Africa relations. From 2008 to 2011, Dr. Yoon Sun was the China analyst for the International Crisis Group, ICG, based in Beijing, specializing in China's foreign policy towards conflict countries and the developing world. Prior to the ICG, she worked on U.S.-Asia relations in Washington, D.C. for 5 years. Dr. Yoon Sun earned her PhD degree from Johns Hopkins University. So I'd like to turn this over to Ambassador Joseph DeTrani. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the introduction. Let me just start this session today, expressing our deep condolences for the attack against the two National Guardsmen last week in Washington, D.C. How tragic that was. We will not be talking about that, but our condolences to the families. This is a horrific event. Today we'll be focusing on, as Dr. Jenkins indicated, we'll be looking at that tension between Japan and the People's Republic of China. And the tension, as we all know, generated from the initial comments from the Japanese Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, that you know, if there is a blockade or a military move from the PRC towards Taiwan, that would be viewed as an existential threat to the security of the government of Japan. And Japan may have to take some military action in response. And that generated a very, very definite flare-up between the two countries. And this is where and the subsequent telephone conversation between President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping. And with President Donald Trump then going back to the Prime Minister in Japan and indicating that maybe we should tone this down and try to approach this in a more diplomatic fashion. So this is the major discussion today. A lot on the table. The 28-point peace plan to end the war in Ukraine, the tragic war in Ukraine, going into its fourth year with significant casualties on both sides. This is hopefully we'll see movement on that. But there are so many issues we should be getting into. But today we're going to focus on China, Japan, and the tension between both these countries. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Yun Sun. I can't think of someone who knows China and the region better than Dr. Yun Sun. She really is an expert, and we're very fortunate to have her today. Dr. Yun.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm really honored to be on this panel, and thank you for the opportunity. And thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for the invitation to be here. So I thought for my opening remarks, I'll just lay a few groundwork here for the discussion that will follow. Basically, to unpack what has happened so far and how both sides, both China and Japan, have already backed themselves into a corner, and also unpack why China has taken such a forward-leaning and aggressive stance, almost unprecedented in the recent history of the Chinese diplomacy towards Japan this time around, and maybe a little discussion as for how we can explore a way out of this current stalemate. So, Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi's November 7th comment made during a parliamentary inquiry. The question was if there is an attack on Taiwan by China, what would be the Japanese response to it? And her response basically said that, well, this attack on Taiwan could be deemed as a situation threatening Japan's survival. And the comment has triggered a series of escalating diplomatic, political, economic, and military reactions from China. The legal term, a situation threatening Japan's survival, would allow Japan to deploy self-defense forces, constituting a de facto military intervention in a Taiwan contingency. So the actions that have taken by both governments since then have backed themselves into a corner. The question is how they can get out of it. Strictly speaking, Prime Minister Takaichi's comment does not violate a shared understanding in Japanese policy community that Japan's military involvement in a Taiwan contingency is inevitable, because China's naval blockade of Taiwan will inevitably disrupt Japan's ceiling of communication, and U.S.-Japan security alliance and the unavoidable usage of U.S. military bases in Japan in the event of a U.S. military intervention will solicit Chinese attacks or even preemptive strikes of Japanese territory, therefore posing a direct threat to Japan's national security and also the safety of Japanese nationals. So in this sense, Japan is entangled in the Taiwan situation, period. However, despite being a common shared understanding, this tacit understanding has not been translated into a public official position. Japanese politicians have attempted to maintain strategic ambiguity on the issue, citing the potential cause of the Taiwan contingency as a key criterion that will determine Japan's response, including military ones. Part of the reason is that there's no need to poke China in the eye. Japan only needs to do what it needs to do when the decision is required, and there's no need to state it in advance publicly. In this sense, Takaichi's comment was not seen as terribly necessary from a Taiwan contingency perspective. Whether she says it or not, Japan is entangled and involved. But China's rapid escalation and harsh responses are also out of ordinary. Other than diplomatic protests and public shaming, in the economic domain, we have seen China suspending seafood import from Japan, advised against tourism by Chinese nationals in Japan. They have suspended 12 airline routes between China and Japan, and China has also circulated potential measures, including rare earths export control on Japan. China has been carrying out 3 rounds of military exercises and training in the Bohai Sea and Yellow Sea, and has gone all out at multilateral institutions, including the United Nations, to accuse Japan of violating international law and the post-war world order. This term was particularly referenced in the readout from the presidential phone call earlier this week. So the aggressiveness and forwardness of the Chinese pushback is unprecedented. China has rejected Takaichi's explanation made earlier this week, and the explanation included a statement that Japan is not in a position to recognize Taiwan's legal status because Japan has already renounced all rights and claims under the Treaty of San Francisco. It is obvious that Beijing will use this opportunity to try to settle the issue of Japan's involvement in a Taiwan contingency. But for Japan, now the genie is out of the bottle. Withdrawing or retracting the comment publicly is obviously not an option for the Prime Minister either. Her domestic popularity has soared as she has resisted the pressure from China. Her government could collapse if she formally retracts the statement, which will have significant impact for the future by implying that Japan has abandoned potential military intervention in a Taiwan contingency. So, as the Chinese government put it, Takaichi's comment is unprecedented in 3 ways. That one, it is the first time that Japan states a Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency on the official level. And it is also, in the Chinese eyes, the first time that Japan expresses its ambition of military intervention, and the first time Japan, quote, quote, issued a military threat against China. I think the accusation is quite inflated and exaggerated, but the severity of the Chinese responses reflects at least 3 considerations. First, China has always seen Japan as directly responsible and historically guilty for the Taiwan situation as it is today. Japan annexed Taiwan from China in 1895 per the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Its colonization of Taiwan only ended formally in 1951 per the Treaty of San Francisco, as Japan gave up all claims and rights associated with Taiwan. And the note here is that China rejects the Treaty of San Francisco because it was not a participating party, and because the stipulation leaves open the question of Taiwan's legal status in the treaty. But China's rejection of the treaty also creates vulnerability in its own position. So does China recognize that Japan has already given up all its rights and claims associated with Taiwan if China rejects the treaty once and for all? For the longest time, I think China has also had its own wishful thinking on Japan-Taiwan relations based on in the Chinese view, Japan's guilty verdict on Taiwan. Beijing has had this unilateral belief that Japan's understanding and respect of PRC position on Taiwan being a part of PRC territory in the diplomatic normalization equates to a Japanese acceptance of PRC's claim. But in reality, the two are not the same. China would like to cite the Cairo Declaration and Potsdam Declaration to establish China's legal claim over Taiwan, but Cairo Declaration clearly stipulates that the returning of Taiwan was to the Republic of China, not to the People's Republic of China. In fact, when Cairo Declaration was made, People's Republic of China was not even in existence. So while PRC wants to argue that it has succeeded and replaced Republic of China, it cannot explain why Republic of China is still in existence on Taiwan Island, and China still advocates for 92 consensus, which literally translates as one China, two interpretations. So one China, both PRC and ROC are practically in existence at the same time. Second, in Beijing's view, if China does not push back Takaichi's comment, the future question on Japan's role in a Taiwan contingency will no longer be whether Japan will play a role, but how Japan will play the role. The new narrative will change the course of policy and change the course of discussion, and potentially introduce a new normal of U.S. allies' collective response to Taiwan contingency. So not just by Japan, but also by U.S. allies, including Australia, Canada, and also U.S. NATO allies. For China, such a trend must be nipped in its bud. Third, Takaichi's comment happened at a distinct juncture when, in the Chinese view, U.S. commitment to the defense of Taiwan is faltering. Consequently, China sees its unification campaign has been gaining ground in Taiwan because the Taiwanese public maybe they have realized Taiwan can no longer count on U.S. commitment. This, in the Chinese view, in Beijing's view, has led to the election of a pro-unification chairwoman of the KMT party, the opposition party in Taiwan last month. But now, Takaichi's comment obviously strengthened the position of the DPP, the pro-independence ruling party of Taiwan, and more importantly, will force the U.S. to recalculate its position because of the U.S.-Japan Collective Defense Treaty. In this sense, Takaichi's comment delivered a heavy blow to China's perceived victory in moving the needle of U.S. policy towards Taiwan, and also moving the needle of the Taiwanese public opinion. So currently what we're seeing is China is out for blood. Beijing aims to use this opportunity to the maximum to push back, to set the record straight, and deny Japan any legitimate role in a future Taiwan contingency. But if you think about it, there's very little China can do to actually force Takaichi to retract her comment, especially if Japan is willing to carry the cost of economic sanctions and China's diplomatic rage. The similar example here was China's reaction to South Korea's deployment of THAAD system back in 2016. So despite the deterioration of bilateral relations between China and South Korea at that time and China's severe economic sanctions on the country, Beijing could not force South Korea to change its decision in the end, and things eventually moved on. At some point, U.S. could play the role of pacifying China while leaving Japan's integrity intact. But China's relationship with Japan is unlikely to improve in the foreseeable future, as long as Prime Minister Takaichi remains to be in office. So this is my opening remarks. Thank you very much for having me here again. I look forward to the comments and to the discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Yun-sun. Wow, fascinating, but also in-depth. I think your comments just spoke about the complexity of this issue, and you talked about the Cairo Declaration and the Republic of China, and then the establishment of the People's Republic of China, and how those pieces come together, and also the dynamics within Taiwan itself, with the and now with the ascendance of the DPP. But also the elections, the recent elections in Taiwan, where a KMT member was elected. So yeah, these are very, very important issues. They're very complex in many ways, and I think our discussion will touch on some of these issues. So let's start the discussion with Dr. Mansourov. Could you start it, please?
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador, and Dr. Yun. Welcome to our program. Thank you so very much for your terrific opening remarks, which laid a very solid foundation for our discussion. Now, I'm thinking about some of the issues you raised when you suggested that we're seeing much more robust, if not aggressive, approach to this issue by both Beijing and Tokyo. And so thinking about the causes of the current tensions, I'd like us to go back to the initial remarks made by Japan's Prime Minister, which kind of ignited the current round of escalation. And I'm just curious, I mean, whether it was a personal mistake on your part due to some inexperience at that level of, leadership as some people suggested, maybe she now regrets what she said. Although again, we haven't heard any statements from the Japanese Foreign Ministry retreating from that position. And if it's not a personal mistake, was it a calculated move? I mean, a calculated provocation, as some said. Then the question is, of course, on whose part? On the part of the Japanese government, or on the part of some other forces? You might comment on that. And if not that, if it was not a calculated move, then is it a reflection of growing kind of misalignment of core national interests between the two countries? If I'm in Beijing, again, I'm not a Chinese leader, but if I see, the recent moves by the Japanese government to revise 3 basic national security documents, kind of reinterpreting Japan's role in the post-World War order, kind of allowing more flexibility and more robust use of the self-defense forces and all the contingencies outside Japan. When I see some moves by the Japanese government to revise the 3 non-nuclear principles, which used to be a taboo, and now not only they openly talk about it, but the new government in Japan indicated its willingness to relax some of those non-nuclear restrictions. When I see the efforts by the Japanese government to boost its arms exports, especially the decision to sell to the United States a Japanese version of the Patriot air defense system. And of course, the recent reports about Japan's deployment of medium-range cruise missiles, 110 kilometers of Taiwan on an island of Yonaguni. Again, if I'm in Beijing, that is something which is worrisome. And now when I hear an official statement that Taiwan's contingency is Japan's contingency, that any threat to Taiwan's security will be regarded as a threat to Japan's national security. Again, given all the historical memories of Japanese kind of aggression in the past, I can understand why Beijing decided to kind of basically to wake up and push back, and some say maybe it's long overdue. So I'd like to hear kind of your thinking about why do you think that what happened on the one hand. On the other hand, the second question would be about the possible effects, how far all that can go, this current confrontation. You mentioned the San Francisco Peace Treaty and kind of raised the question whether it's a mistake or not for China to basically not recognize its significance, because that's an international document agreement where Japan actually renounced its rights and claims to Taiwan. But if you hear what the Chinese Foreign Ministry is saying, they're talking about the UN Charter, actually. And for the first time in decades, they referred to the so-called enemy clauses in the UN Charter, namely Article 53, Article 77, and Article 107, which allow the victors, the winning powers in the Second World War, to take action, military action, without UN Security Council resolution, to bring to order or rein in the enemy states, so-called enemy states, if they deem that the actions of the enemy states begin to threaten regional and global security. And of course, under the UN Charter, Japan was regarded as the enemy state together with Germany. And so my question is, again, under that rubric, how far it all can go. Is Beijing bluffing, by raising these references, by putting on the table the enemy clause provisions, or is it serious about actually carrying out some preventive military action here before Japan actually increased its defense spending not only to 2% of the GDP, but as some people wanted to 5% of the GDP when the Japanese military really will kind of exponentially increase its capabilities. So, two questions. First, what's behind it? Some personal mistakes, strategic calculations, or a misalignment, growing misalignment of national interests. And second, how far can all this go? Is Beijing really serious about it? Or is it simply bluffing, trying to scare off a new untested leader of Japan?
Thank you, Alexandra. This is a terrific discussion of what happened. I think the first question is for why it happened. We all have our guesses, right? I think there have been one string of thought saying that, well, she is not terribly experienced on this issue, so she was asked a question and she just answered to her best honesty. And honestly, I think her answer does reflect a shared consensus in the Japanese policy community that Japan will be involved. And there's not a big question as for Japan will, but still making the public statement is very different from having a tacit shared understanding within the policy community. And another argument is that she sees herself as the true believer or the true, what's a better word, true heiress, if you will, of Prime Minister Abe. And the late Prime Minister Abe, when he was still alive and politically influential, he had made comments after he left the position of Prime Minister that a Taiwan contingency would constitute a Japan contingency. So within the Liberal Democratic Party, there has been this established record or this belief that a Taiwan contingency will inevitably equate to Japan's involvement. But still, what she said is not untrue. The question is whether you state it publicly as a leader of the nation. But regardless of why she said what she said, I think the result is now we are where we are. And the question is, well, how do we get out of this? I think that gets into the interesting question, as Alexandra, you mentioned, how far can it go? And I think the question behind this how far question is, what is China's endgame here? What is China trying to achieve from this episode of escalation? And here, I think Beijing is trying to use this opportunity to its maximum extent possible to prevent Japan's future intervention in the Taiwan contingency. The Chinese are using economic coercion, using a diplomatic campaign to establish basically a position internationally that Japan's military intervention in the Taiwan contingency is not only unacceptable, it will also be extremely costly for Japan. So it's basically to push the question back from how Japan will intervene to whether Japan should intervene. So I think the Chinese campaign is aimed at an end state where Japan's future involvement in the Taiwan contingency is not a decided matter. China is trying to instigate Japanese public opinion or to solicit basically Japanese economic cost to Japan that even Japan has to pay such a high cost for just a mere comment. by the prime minister. Just imagine what the true cost will be if Japan does decide to intervene in a potential, if Japan does intervene in a future Taiwan contingency. Preemptive strikes at this stage, I think that's early because after all, so far what has happened is verbal statements and spats. But we haven't seen this current round evolving toward a military action against Japan. And honestly, just based on a comment from the prime minister, I don't think a Chinese preemptive military action would be warranted, and the Chinese will have a difficult time justifying why you're taking actions against Japan simply over a verbal comment by the prime minister. But I would not preclude the possibility of China being much more aggressive for example, in the Diaoyu Senkaku Island, in the maritime domain around the disputed island, and also in terms of the Chinese intrusion into Japanese aegis. So whether Japan will put up a fight and react to the Chinese intrusion, I think that's going to be potentially a point of future escalation if there is such an opportunity. But yeah, I think so far the Chinese action has been primarily political and economic and also diplomatic, but military actions do not appear to be the top priority at this stage. Thank you.
No, this is very
Thank
good, Dr. Sun. Let me add on excellent questions from Alexander, and I think your answers were right on the mark. Let me just comment on a sense that I have, and I think a number of other people have, that maybe China overreacted to the prime minister's comments. Obviously, she's just recently appointed prime minister, and maybe as she's indicated, she's not going to be responding to hypothetical questions in the future along those lines. But very, it's almost reminiscent of the wolf warrior diplomacy and how China is going to be all over you if you misspeak. And in this case, I think, and as Dr. Sun, you indicated, this has sort of been the policy in Japan, but it's an unspoken policy. It's not put out there, but because it does, I mean, intellectually, but also pragmatically, it does affect the elements of Japan's well-being. When you look at the when you look at the Taiwan Strait, and when you look at the contingencies that could affect certainly Japan in an economic sense, but also national security sense. So I think maybe some would say, and I'm one of them who would say, sort of like an overreaction to this. But then the phone call between President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping, and then the subsequent conversation that President Donald Trump had with Prime Minister Takaichi, that maybe you should tone this down. Maybe we should let's moderate our discussion on this, and with the announcement that he'll be visiting Beijing, he'll be visiting the People's Republic of China in April of 2026. Almost a sense that here you have the President of the United States telling the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister of Japan, just tone it down. Let's not. Although we've seen significant rhetoric, but also actions from China in regards, as you said, Dr. Sun, to tourism, but also economic moves on the part of China. So I guess my question is this the return to, in your sense, that return to a wolf warrior diplomacy, that China is just going to be, overly, and when I look at it, when I look at the China and its relationship with the Russian Federation, and now with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK. You're talking about three nuclear powers coming together in a very significant way, and you could put Iran into this equation, but certainly those three, that's pretty powerful an alignment of those nuclear weapon states, and telling this to Japan and certainly South Korea is hearing this, and indeed Taiwan is sitting there hearing all this, non-nuclear weapon states. So I guess what I'm saying here is, Dr. Sun, what is your sense? Why is China? Is this? And I think my personal view is this is a core issue, and China's made it very clear it's a core issue, and it speaks to the survival of the Chinese Communist Party. Let's be frank about it. In my view, I don't think any leader in the People's Republic of China who walks away from ensuring that Taiwan is not part of China, and with the option of peacefully resolving it, but even with the possibility of a military move. And we see the exercises around Taiwan. So I could understand the element of a core issue and how important it is and everything, but quiet diplomacy, what's happened to quiet diplomacy? What's happening to sending messages back and forth? And now with phone calls between the President of the United States and the President of the People's Republic of China, and then a phone call to the new Prime Minister Takaichi in Japan, sort of saying tone it down a bit. Obviously, the U.S.-China relationship is so important. There's no question about that. But certainly, our credibility is also very important for the United States. Are we sort of I don't want to use the word complicit in this, but having a conversation with President Xi Jinping and then going back to the Prime Minister Takaichi and saying tone it down a bit, was that a little too much? And why do you think China has reacted the way they have? And what's happened to quiet diplomacy and this wolf warrior diplomacy? Is that back? And where are we going with this, in your sense, Dr. Sun?
Thank you, Ambassador. Those are really terrific questions. Those are the million-dollar questions. I think it really points to the core of the issue here. That why did China do what it did? First, coming to the presidential phone call between President Trump and President Xi, just based on the Chinese readout alone, the Chinese reference to post-war world order, seems very clear that China was keen on talking about Japan. Because in the Chinese view, Japan as a defeated party in World War II does not have certain rights. So for China to talk to President Trump about post-war world order, the message is very clear that this phone call is about Japan. It is about Taiwan, but it's more about what Japan has commented in terms of Taiwan. And I know the Wall Street Journal has reported that following that phone call, President Trump has called Prime Minister Takaichi and told her not to provoke China. But we have also seen the Japanese official response to that report by Wall Street Journal is that they deny that such a request actually happened. But I think it's also very clear that President Trump does not intend to get into a war with China. He sees himself as a peacemaker. He sees improvement of relationship with China as a priority so far for his foreign strategy. And that does say a lot. And I think that contributes to how China has interpreted the situation with Takaichi's comment, because in the Chinese view, for the longest time, the reason that China could not achieve unification is the United States. It's not Taiwanese public opinion. It's not international law. It's not Japan. It's a U.S. attitude. It's a U.S. position. So now with President Trump, the Chinese feel that they are finally seeing the end of the tunnel. They're seeing the dawn is coming, that maybe unification is going to happen, because now we have a US president who has not even talked about Taiwan and what is US policy towards Taiwan publicly since he assumed office in January, so almost for a whole year. And the fact that US, there are different interpretations, but we know that Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te was not able to have a transit through the United States this summer.
Right.
And we also know for a fact that US has also suspended or canceled $400 million of military assistance to Taiwan. So when you put all these elements together, I think the Chinese are walking away with a message that US support for Taiwan is faltering. And maybe US will not adopt a complete opposing attitude if China pushes forward with unification. Whether they are misunderstanding or misinterpreting the situation, that is a different question. But at least based on what has happened so far, that is the Chinese interpretation, that they're seeing the end of the tunnel. So at this particular point, which is why I talked about this particular historical juncture, when Japan came out to equate Taiwan contingency to a Japan contingency and promise Japan's potential intervention, I think it delivered an unexpected blow to China's almost euphoria with what has happened to US policy towards Taiwan. That the Chinese felt, we're finally going to get our way. We're seeing the end of this. And who are you, Japan, to come out and tell us that we can't? And you, Japan, is in the Chinese view, you are responsible for where we are on Taiwan at the first place. Had you not annexed Taiwan back in 1895, we wouldn't have this problem to begin with. So I think there is a historical agony, an emotional grievance, and also an element of surprise that all contributed to the Chinese. I would agree that the Chinese escalation has been very fast. It's unprecedented. Just the way that they have developed their policy response almost in a coordinated way from multiple domains, economic, military, political, and diplomatic. I think the Chinese escalated very, very quickly and put themselves into a corner. And from the very beginning of this escalation, the Chinese practically eliminated the possibility of quiet diplomacy because comment was made publicly. So the Chinese felt that they also needed to react publicly in order to push the genie back to the bottle, which is impossible given the Japanese domestic politics. So I would say that if you look at China's current priority, I would not say that China's current priority is external, meaning that I don't think that Chinese leaders are prioritizing external affairs over what they have domestically. I think if you look at China's economic slowdown, look at how President Xi Jinping is no longer participating in a number of the multilateral fora that he used to participate in. I think it's a very clear indicator that China's top priority is, at the moment, is domestic. And we also have to question whether the Chinese military, the PLA, has the ability to launch a military campaign against either Taiwan or Japan, given the recent massive purge of its leadership structure. So I would say that had this comment not happened, I think the Chinese probably would prefer to muddle through on its relationship with Japan. If you think about it, at the APEC summit, Xi Jinping actually had a meeting with Takaichi. If the Chinese decided that the relationship was going to go bad and Japan was not going to try to build a positive relationship with China, Xi Jinping would not have had that meeting with Takaichi, right? So I think a lot of this has an element of surprise for China. Thank you.
No, that's excellent, Dr. Sun. I couldn't agree with you more. I think your analysis is right on the mark on that. Alexander, let me go back to you, and then I would like to continue my personal discussion. Also, I have a few questions with Dr. Sun. So over to you, Alexander.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Excellent discussion. I'm really enjoying it. Now, Ambassador, you raised a question about China's possible overreaction. And so I'd like to make a comment and then ask a question. comment. In the beginning, I kind of put not the blame, but lion's share of responsibility on Japan's actions for what's going on. At least in my question, I alluded to that predisposition of mine. But now I'd like to turn the tables around. And basically, I would say that I don't see it as China's overreaction. Why not? Because if China truly is preparing for the unification with Taiwan by military force, ultimately, as some analysts and observers argue, then what does it need to do? Again, to lay the groundwork for that, in addition to building military capabilities. It needs definitely to isolate Taiwan diplomatically by preventing other key regional powers from backing Taiwan. I mean, that's the lesson of the war in Ukraine. I mean, that's what Russia failed to do from 2014 by convincing the countries like Germany and France and Britain that any military intervention by NATO would be very ineffective, very high cost for them. President Putin failed to do it, and so now they're reaping, the results of that failed diplomatic preventive actions. Now, the Chinese learned from that, and I would argue, if indeed they're serious about military option, then they need to, on the diplomatic front, to make sure that Japan will get it. That if they intervene, as Yun Sun said, it will be hugely costly, and it will not gain Japan anything other than a lot of pain. And so in that sense, it may not be an overreaction, but it may be kind of long-term thinking ahead, to teach Japan a lesson now, so that when the D-Day comes, Japan will think 1,000 times before sending troops or intervening militarily. So that's my observation. So that's why I'm puzzled. I mean, who is to blame for all this? Japan or China? Who is driving all that? And I see a lot of good reasons in Yun Sun's argument, very credible, good argument. Now, my question is on a different subject, and that is the impact of this tension between Japan and China on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea is a military ally of China and obviously is bound by a mutual defense treaty to come to the defense of China. And we know they can do it very well, looking at North Korean military assistance to Russia in the Ukraine situation. South Korea is a strategic partner of Japan. I mean, whether they're military allies or not, there are different views on that. But they talk a lot about military cooperation, military coordination. I mean, they try to do it bilaterally, trilaterally, whatever.
Alexander, you have a question, please.
Yes, the question is, what do you expect the impact of this tension to be on the Korean Peninsula, on relations between China and North Korea, between Japan and South Korea, if this tension, if this conflict gets aggravated and worsens?
Thank you, Alexander. First, I would like to completely agree with you in terms of the your assessment on why the Chinese pursue this type of coercive actions and sanctions. And I think it's a very interesting topic to deliberate whether the Chinese economic coercion and sanction has been effective. Because if you look at the immediate effect, the Chinese sanction has almost never been able to reverse the decision that the sanctions were targeting on. Whether this is the, say, the Nobel Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo, or it was the South Korean decision to deploy THAAD, the Chinese sanctions are not able to reverse those decisions. But the Chinese sanctions do have a future impact that will act upon the future calculus of the targeted government, meaning that South Korean government, when they think about its future decisions that would anger China, considering the previous economic cost of their decisions, I think they would think twice. And I think that's what the Chinese also intend to achieve with their with their coercion, that maybe this is overreaction. Maybe they're not able to make Prime Minister Takaichi to withdraw her comment, but the Chinese are also aiming to influence the future Japanese politicians' position on this matter. Just don't say this, don't state this position publicly. Then coming to the question of the Korean Peninsula is it's an interesting dynamics because we're definitely seeing China trying to build better ties with South Korea at the moment. It seems the fact that China did not react, if you look at the Chinese reaction to the announced nuclear-powered submarine by President Trump, and South Korea will be in the process to acquire this submarine, is an entirely different response compared to China's response to AUKUS. So the Chinese have taken a much more moderate position toward the South Korean acquisition of the nuclear-powered sub, and you have to ask the question why. I think the fact that Lee administration just started its tenure, the Chinese are looking at 5 years to go with President Lee Jae-myung. They all play into the Chinese calculus. And among China, South Korea, and Japan, we know that they have a trilateral summit that has been suspended for a while. There was showing some signs of positive development, but now I think it's going to be back in the fridge. I think what the Chinese are trying to do is to try to pull closer with South Korea, while China's relationship with Japan is below zero. So part of that reason is the Chinese sees a historical alignment of position between China and South Korea vis-a-vis Japan, because both countries were victims of Japan's military actions before and during World War II, right? So Chinese have always tried to play this historical card, telling South Korea that, well, you should have some distance with Japan. We are on the same side, and also by that token, I think the Chinese are also trying to undermine the U.S. security alliance system in Northeast Asia. I don't see an immediate impact on North Korea's calculus just yet, or China-North Korea relations. It could potentially have an impact down the road, but I think currently North Korea has other priorities. Thank you.
No, Dr. Sun, that's excellent. Thank you for those excellent comments. Let me follow on to Alexander's comments about North Korea. KIDA, the Korea Institute of Defense Analysis, just came out with a report, which is, I don't think, overly stunning for people who've been watching North Korea, but I think for the average person, it is very significant, where they're talking about North Korea has currently a stockpile of nuclear weapons, which is in the hundreds. It could be over 100, and we've always put it at 50, 60, and so forth. So North Korea is building a nuclear weapons capability, and now with its, and Alexander mentioned this, with the Mutual Defense Treaty with the Russian Federation, probably getting some assistance, most likely getting assistance from Russia in regards to their nuclear program, but also their missile programs. Etc., in return for significant assistance to Russia in its war in Ukraine. So North Korea is a player, and North Korea is obviously aligned now with the Mutual Defense Treaty with the Russian Federation. I think the relations with China are improving. I think President Xi and the leadership in Beijing has reached out to some extent, and maybe because they're overly concerned about the relationship that Pyongyang now has with the Russian Federation. So North Korea is a player in this equation, a nuclear player in this equation. It's understandable that South Korea, with the Washington Declaration and the U.S. commitment on nuclear capabilities with the nuclear umbrella, is significant. I mean, our credibility for the U.S. credibility is everything. Because unless that nuclear umbrella, unless that extended nuclear deterrence commitment is meaningful and is credible, there's no question that South Korea and eventually Japan will seek their own nuclear weapons capabilities and so forth. So you got North Korea into this equation. You have a very aligned relationship with China, and now a mutual defense treaty with the Russian Federation. So that's all very significant on that side of the equation. I think with the Lee Jae-myung government, the U.S. has been very clear. We're allies. We are committed. You just mentioned, Dr. Sun, the nuclear submarine and the technology that will go with that, in addition to AUKUS. And China has not been very open about criticizing any of that or questioning that, as they did with AUKUS to a great extent. So that's interesting, because you see that dynamic and the realization that South Korea needs something in that regard. But when you look at all these pieces and you look at what's happening with Taiwan and with China's attempted intimidation, and I would say that because of the military exercises and the flights and the medium line that's been crossed so many times, but the U.S. does have a Taiwan Relations Act, 1979. It's on the books. It's very explicit in saying a peaceful resolution to resolving the issues with Taiwan. That has to be very much in the fore. And I think President Donald Trump obviously understands all of the above. Now, his predecessor, President Biden, was very outspoken in talking about militarily defending Taiwan in that regard. And as you said, Dr. Sun, very correctly so, for the past almost a year, not much discussion on Taiwan. Although we did have some sales of military weaponry, defensive military weaponry that finally has gone to Taiwan in that regard, about over $300 million worth of that weaponry and so forth. So I guess my question is this: with the Taiwan Relations Act, with the U.S. credibility in the region, and we see the other side of the equation, and with Russia, with China, with the DPRK, North Korea, and that alignment and so forth. Credibility is a lot. Is the U.S. going to lose its credibility? Will we see more countries like South Korea and Japan seeking nuclear weapons if we lose that credibility? And that has to be a key element for President Donald Trump, because, as you said, the relationship with China is so important. We don't want to have war. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, we were there for China in the 80s and so forth. And this is where the two countries need to come together. And I think our people in the United States, but also in China, realize we have to work together on the issues, whether it's pandemics and other issues that speak to the well-being, the common good that affects all people. And you mentioned President Donald Trump is seeking peace, and his efforts in Gaza, and now his efforts in Ukraine, and so forth. So I guess my point is this: if the U.S. doesn't show resolve, if the U.S. doesn't say a peaceful resolution to issues with China, understanding the DPP is in power, but we've made some moves already to show that we are trying to moderate and to be a fair negotiator in that regard. But we do have commitments. We do have commitments, and credibility is a lot of that. And I mentioned early on in the introduction the 28-point peace plan. And some would say, what are we doing? Are we trying to appease President Vladimir Putin? with the Donbass going, with 600,000 troops being maxed, with telling them they can't join NATO. What are we doing? Will the U.S. lose its credibility? Put your analytic hat on this, and looking at it from the U.S. Issues as you have. Do we lose credibility if we're not hard on these issues? If we don't show resolve, and if we show extensive flexibility on some of these issues, like what's going on with Japan now and China in regards to Taiwan, what are the consequences, the long-term consequences for the U.S. and its allies and our credibility working with our allies?
Thank you, Ambassador. Well, you really point to the key question or the debate currently is, has been ongoing since the beginning of the second Trump administration, right? Well, I would say first to begin with, none of these policies is a yes or no question. That we defend Taiwan or we do not defend Taiwan. One China policy is a range. There's a higher option, and then there's also the lower option. I would say that if you compare, I think in terms of the verbal commitment or the verbal expression of commitment, the Biden administration was definitely higher up. That the president came out 4 times to say that we will militarily intervene if China invades Taiwan. And then I think for the current Trump administration, we're seeing the lower option. That we are still, for example, we're still selling weapons to Taiwan, and we are still maintaining our certain commitments. Like, for example, currently there are more than 500 Marines currently in Taiwan, joining basically provided joint training for the Taiwanese armed force. So none of these policies is really black or white, that yes, we're doing it, or no, we're not doing it. But it depends on the degree and also the deliberation of the details. And I think it's also a curious question that, yes, you're absolutely correct, that our One China policy is about a peaceful resolution of the Taiwan question, that we don't have a position in terms of the result was eventually whether it's independence or it's unification. We only care about that the process to achieve that goal needs to be peaceful. And I think that's where things get a little fuzzy, because Taiwan Relations Acts also talk about the Chinese coercive behavior needs to be countered by the United States. But when we think about the Chinese gray zone warfare these days, especially the cognitive warfare, the psychological warfare, so things that they have been doing to change the needle or move the needle of the Taiwanese public opinion, how do we counter that? And what would be an effective military means to counter those operations? And those operations, honestly, are what will be critical coming to the future Taiwanese public opinion and what they will prefer in terms of the future of Taiwan. And I'm not an expert on Russia-Ukraine, but I think there's always the question that U.S. must maintain credibility as what, and to achieve what. So on that question, I think different administrations have had different answers. That some of the strategists would prefer a much more forward-leaning or maximum interpretation of what U.S. needs to provide. And I think the current Trump administration is aiming for a lower version or a more cost-effective way of maintaining the U.S. credibility without sacrificing or without paying the maximum cost. So whether that is a correct approach, I think that will continue to be the focus of debate for the U.S. policy community.
Oh, Dr. Sun.
Can I make one?
What a great
quick statement.
response. Alexander, we've gone over, but please, 1 second. Go ahead.
Just 1 second. I want to say that as President of South Korea traveled around the world at various news conferences, he never took a question on the unlawful prosecution of Dr. Hakcha Kanmun. It's an international outrage that she is being politically prosecuted. It's a shame that international NGOs that are so much interested in the human rights in North Korea, they do not see what's going on in the South when 82-year-old mother is being held illegally in jail in inhumane conditions. It's a disgrace. Mother Moon must be freed now. Bring her home before
Well,
Christmas.
Alexander, thank you. Thank you for making those comments, because I think you're right on the mark. And I think we all would agree with you on your analysis of that. And hopefully we will see this come to a conclusion, a fair, just conclusion. And Mother Moon and will hopefully she will be she will get some apologies from the how she's been treated.
Apologies and compensation.
Yes, thank you for making those comments, Alexander. Dr. Sun, I can't say enough about your analysis and the work you're doing on China, but U.S.-China relations, China and its role in East Asia, but beyond East Asia. I think your analysis, and I totally recommend to any of our listeners, just read what you write. You're right on the mark, and the Stimson Center is very fortunate, and we're all fortunate to have you as a key analyst on looking at U.S.-China relations and so forth. Dr. Sun, thank you for joining us today. I think we all learned a lot. This is an ongoing discussion, and we hope you join us again in the future as we continue to discuss these issues. So over to you, Dr. Jenkins, and thank you for permitting us to have these very interesting discussions.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And Dr. Yoon Sun, we are very, very intrigued and also very encouraged by your remarks. It brought clarity to so much of this urgent matter, very important matter. Thank you, Dr. Mansourov, always for your insights. We are really happy that the Washington Times itself covers the Washington Brief, and I know that I want to thank Chris Dolan, the president there, as well as Guy Taylor, the international security team leader. And he really will be delighted with this program also. So I thank you to our audience, which is not only in America, but very strong in Asia. And we really want to continue to bring the best experts on the issue of security and peace, particularly in Northeast Asia. And we thank you all and have a wonderful week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
This webcast is pre-recorded.